Hello, everyone. Today I'd like to talk about one of my pet hates in Jungian typology. And that pet hate is visual identification. Now, visual identification is an interesting concept. It's sort of like physiognomy. Well, physiognomy. It's the idea that you can work out someone's personality type, and socionics type, one's type of information metabolism, simply from looking at a person's face. Now, there are different variants of visual identification. There's the static example, which is probably the most interesting example, in that it focuses simply on static photographs. There are some practitioners, especially in the Eastern schools of socionics, who think that all you have to do is send a few photographs of someone and they can just work out their type just by looking at those photographs. That's a static example. The dynamic visual identification people, they tend to focus on, say, videos, moving images, where, again, they're just looking at the person, looking at how they're moving, rather than actually looking at what the person is saying, what can be indicated about their personality from their behaviors, instead of just looking at the moving image of the person. Now, I would say that this idea, which has been popularized to a great degree by certain socionics figures, such as Sergey Ganin, the owner of socionics.com, where they have various exercises where they can run you through exactly how you can visually identify someone. And then other people like Lyubov Beskova, who employs methodology of actually typing people by looking at how they move physically in films. We're talking about film actors, for instance, and all the sort of difficulties that can come from that sort of methodology for typing people. These approaches to socionics, these ways of typing people, are very disturbing to me. Now, the reason why I find them most disturbing is that I don't think you can have any sort of evidence or any sort of reliability in working out someone's type simply by looking at someone's face, simply by looking at someone's movements. I mean, the way that I'd like to focus on working out someone's type is by talking to someone, or if I can't talk to someone, maybe giving them some sort of test. If we're giving some sort of test, the questions would ask them about their personality, would ask them about what they like to do, ask them about what they like to think about, what their ideas are, their ideals, their motivations, their fears, their strengths, their weaknesses, things about them. And the idea for me is that if you work out these various things about a person, what they do, what they say, how they think, then you can put together a pretty good idea of what their personality type might be. But in visual identification, the only data point you're relying on is this physical image of a person. Now, it doesn't necessarily follow that just because you look a certain way, that you're going to think and act and, well, essentially embody a personality in a certain way. Evidence for this sort of assumption to be valid, to be reasonable to hold. Yet people seem to think that, because I've seen certain patterns, certain anecdotal tendencies towards certain physical appearances, that is how I'm going to type people from now on. So, well, I think it leads to a very lazy approach to typing. It leads to a very sort of, what's the word? It essentially means that instead of actually getting to know someone, instead of actually getting to explore the differences between you and them in terms of their personality, all you're essentially doing is saying, right, that face means that personality type, that face means that personality type. So first of all, it's a very sort of overly simplistic approach. Second, you haven't got that. You basically got that. Have to make that sort of jump between essentially someone's personality and then their physical appearance. Now, usually, when I like to make some sort of jump, and this is sort of an epistemic leap, you could say, it's the leap between saying, right, they look this way, therefore they must think this way. That leap needs to be substantiated in some way. Usually, what a scientist would do if they were to make some sort of leap is they try to collect as much data as possible. They try to test this theory, this hypothesis, to see if it actually works out that way. And I'd say that to work out what a personality type is from the face, well, there's a huge amount of variability there. There's so many different factors that go into a facial structure. You're talking about nose size. How about the distance between the eyes, the distance between the mouth and the nose, the size of the ears, the heaviness of the brow? All these different factors go into making a face. And you're going to say that you could work out someone's personality type from the various arrangement of these different features on top of someone's head, all those different variabilities, and you're going to be able to do that accurately. You're going to do that reliably. That's a very strong claim, a very claim that arouses skepticism. Now, what I would say to that is there is some way, I guess, where you can make this idea of visual identification better. For the time being, I think that you need to first of all focus on not doing visual identification. I think you should start by actually getting to know people better, talking to people, understanding people better, understanding the theory, understanding how different types behave, how different types may approach the world in different ways. That's the stuff you should get done first, the meat and potatoes of working out personality type, before you start to say, oh, there's this easier method that can work it all out, even though it makes some sort of dubious connections between one thing and another. No, you could start to make that something which is workable. Now, how would you make visual identification workable? How would you make it something which you could begin to actually start using? Well, I'd say, first of all, you need to put it to the test. You need to see if it is the case that different faces actually align in a certain way that can link up to different personality types reliably. Now, how do you do that? You need to have lots of people. You need to type lots of different people and have large sample sizes. Now, given the huge amount of variability, I'd say something like, I'm making a guess, maybe 100 people for each type. So that would be 1,600 different people, because there's 16 types. Now, let's say you did manage to, through a completely independent method, not typing by their face, just having a very reliable method, work out personality type, and so something which already is, difficult. We're working on the good method of working out personality type. We like to talk to people, to work with that, have 1 hour interviews. But let's say that you had a very good method, had nothing to do with visual identification, just a very good independent method, and that was quite reliable. Let's say you use that, and you type 1,600 people, you have 100 for each type. Right. Once you got that, which is a lot of work, and I don't think anyone so far in the world has managed to put together such a sample, I think you could essentially do something like a face merge. There are different softwares online, which can actually do facial merges. You just take different photos, and you can actually use the software to actually merge the faces together, which essentially eradicates all the differences between the faces and finds the things which these faces all have in common. You could do that with, say, the 100 people from each type, and that can create a sort of merged face for each of the types. Now, that's assuming that there actually is something which is distinct. You may have to, one thing it's worth doing is actually taking these different samples and seeing if they vary significantly. If you take one face and another, and there are certain stark differences between one face and another, that could be a sign there's some variation. I mean, even then, not necessarily. One of the issues is that there's a huge assumption already being made in the idea that even if you were able to take 100 different people of the same type, that they'd all correlate to one set of facial characteristics. Well, if it's the case, actually, there may be 4 faces of a certain type. Well, there's simply just more than one. You wouldn't know. You'd have to do some sort of factor analysis on the different faces which you've collected. Now, I'm not sure if there actually is any sort of factor analysis on photographs of faces, but I imagine one could be devised by just looking at, but it's measuring out various distances between different parts and qualities and features on the face. But it would be quite complicated. Okay, let's assume that there definitely is one facial image per type, one set of characteristics for a face per type. You see, you could do these facial merges. Then you'd have something which you could then put to the test. You'd have, the idealized facial image. So what you then do is you go and take that image and you start typing other people outside your sample. And you say to them, right, I'm going to work out through my independent method, not using the visual identification first. without even looking at your face. I'm going to do it completely blind in terms of your face. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a photo of your face once I've worked out your type and see if your face is more similar to the collection or composition of faces for the type which I think you are compared to the 15 other types. Now, if you were to do that multiple times, various people, and you reliably have each person you type independently have their face match up to a certain consolidated face merge sample, then you'd have some evidence for visual identification. And then you could have a proper methodology composed of visual identification for typing people. Now, even so, there's always the room for hubris to sneak in here. Now, one thing I've noticed with a lot of people who use visual identification, usually Eastern sociologists, people from Eastern Europe, I think, because maybe it's the approach to sociologics in that area, maybe less scientifically oriented. But although they do tend to claim that they're practicing a science, which sociologics isn't really a science, I could call it a pre-science at best, something which, if it were practiced in the right way, it could be leaning towards trying to become a science. It still needs plenty of empirical data to support it. But many people in the East claim it already is a science, which also arouses skepticism. Either way. Now, when you talk to these people and they say that they have sociologics down to T, they think this is a science, and they can work out your type looking at your face, they have absolute certainty in their opinion. And one thing, a pattern I've noticed from talking to such people is once they've worked out your type looking at your face, they're not interested at all in what your personality is. If you were to behave in a way which is completely contradictory to what this personality type is meant to be, they would ignore it. They just take what the face is. And that is what I'd say is the hubris. The thing which, even though you have a very strong methodology, which these people don't, you still need to be careful of. Because at the end of the day, this is still secondary to the primary data, which is talking to someone, getting to know their personality as it is, and using that to work out one's personality type. And because at the end of the day, if you even have a very supported methodology for working out type using face, as soon as that starts to contradict the observable personality, that should be an area for doubt. You can't simply use visual identification as a complete replacement for more traditional, more direct methods of measuring personality. So yeah, those are my thoughts on visual identification. I'm not someone who says that there's no possibility that there's visual identification as something which is a real thing, something which can actually work. I've seen anecdotally certain patterns. I've noticed that SEIs have often been sort of rounded in the often have slightly curly hair, even, which is sort of a stereotype. I've seen many LIIs who are very thin, very clear ectomorphs. I've seen SLEs with very sort of strong testosterone-oriented physical appearances. But again, these are anecdotal patterns I've observed. These aren't rules, and I've seen many examples of people which then break these norms, these trends, which makes you think that you can't rely on this to actually type someone. So I think there's potential. It just needs to be done in the right way. And until it's done in the right way, you can't rely on it at all. So for the time being, I say this: visual identification, don't do it.